teachers of Reddit. What is something a student of yours has said that made you think, wow, there is no hope left for you? I work with a second grader who seems to have 3 new boyfriends a week. Not in a cute, innocent way, but in a seriously inappropriate and concerning way. She wears scandalous outfits and goes telling boys she wants to be close with them, claiming they're all in love with her. She started seeking out the quiet, innocent girls in her class and convincing them to tell boys that they like them. She waits until we're not looking to talk to other kids about highly inappropriate subjects. She's always watching me, knowing I'm aware of what she's doing, and waits until I turn my back to whisper inappropriate things to other students. We talk to her parents every week about her behavior and discussions of relationships with other students. It's not surprising that her young, good-looking mom, or her mom's boyfriend, who is at least 10 years younger than her, doesn't address it. I knew she was headed for trouble when, at a young age, she asked, "Miss, do you have a boyfriend?" When I said no, she replied, "I know why you don't have a boyfriend. Boys don't like you. They like me, though. This week, I'm going out with 3 boys, and they all want to be with me." She makes me cringe and a little concerned. Story 2. I was giving a final exam when a girl was sitting on her feet in a very unbalanced computer chair, wobbling back and forth. I told her 3 times to put her feet flat on the floor. Each time I passed, she would put them down and then slowly slide them back under her again. Finally, she fell over and crashed hard onto the floor, then started laughing uncontrollably, rolling up and down. The entire class was completely distracted, and this was a final where every minute counted to finish. When I finally got her to stop laughing, I told her she was disqualified from the final and needed to report to the assistant principal's office immediately. She asked me what the problem was. I explained that repeatedly ignoring my request to sit properly in the chair was bad enough, but the fall and the massive distraction made it far worse. She said, "I bet it's only a problem because I'm black." Good God. It was like, please keep thinking that and use it to justify your outrageous behavior. Story 3. I had a student my very first year of teaching who was old enough to drive themselves to middle school. This student skipped as often as they legally could without getting themselves or their parent into serious trouble. When they were in class, they did anything but what they were supposed to. If told to stand, they'd sit. Asked to read aloud, they'd stay silent. Asked to be silent, they'd start telling stories to the people around them, loudly. The kid was one of 6 brothers and sisters in a family where their mom was present only in the physical sense. At one point, I had to file a report because I hadn't seen the student for a week and a half with no explanation why. My school was pretty awful about that sort of thing, so when I went to ask about it, the people in charge of attendance acted shocked. "Wait, you haven't seen them in how long?" I remember thinking, it's literally your job to notice and report this stuff, not mine. They made their calls and went through the motions, and I checked in later to see what they'd found. They called the mom, and she said she hadn't even noticed the kid was gone. It turned out they'd left with one of their older brothers to live with members of his gang. When the kid came back, nothing had changed. They acted the same, failed every class, ended up in a corrective program like every other year, and then got pushed forward a grade, just like always. This family had been raised to hate authority and reject any system that didn't come from their street. I filed every report I could to get Child Protective Services involved, but from what I learned, their mom knew exactly how to avoid trouble. She checked every box that kept inspectors from digging deeper. It still blows my mind. That kid was smart, really smart, but used that intelligence to work the system just enough to wreck their own future. The family was never removed from that toxic home. The mom raised her children for a life of drugs, trafficking, and prison. I'll never forget overhearing one of the brothers brag once that he couldn't wait for a cop to try to arrest him, so he could go to jail just like our cousin. Kids like that make teaching hard in so many ways, not just in the classroom, where they steal time and energy from the others who want to learn, but in your heart. Most of us become teachers because someone once changed our lives, and we want to be that for someone else. But you learn quickly. There are kids you can give everything to. Your time, your money, your social life, your sanity, and they either never see it, or worse, see you as the enemy for trying to help. That kid hated me, but I was the only teacher actually trying to give them a way out. I met with counselors about them, followed up with attendance clerks, called home multiple times a week, only to get a full voicemail inbox or a slurred hello followed by a hang-up. I grew up in a different kind of poverty than that kid did, but I still wanted to help them the way my teachers once helped me. Still, it changes you. When you see someone hanging off a cliff and you drop everything to pull them up, only for them to use the hand they're hanging on with to flip you off as they fall. Story 4. During lunch duty at a high school, I had to ask a student with a bad reputation to move. He had pulled an extra chair to a table, blocking the area, something that was a clear rule for fire safety. He moved, but then pulled the chair back. I gently reminded him again and said that if it happened a third time, I would have to write him up. He stayed put for about 5 minutes, but then, frustrated that he couldn't hear his friends, he looked at me, pulled the chair back to the table, handed me his ID, and said, "I'm going to jail anyway." I took his ID to get his name, which I already knew, thanked him for cooperating, and left him alone. A month later, he was in a fight, had to be restrained by 3 school cops, and was taken out of school in handcuffs. All students had the option to go outside for lunch to sit and talk in larger groups. He was offered that option by both his friends and me, and the weather was nice. The rule might seem unnecessary until you see why it exists. When I was a student there, I watched a kid have an allergic reaction and struggle to reach adults and nurses because there were 300 students, chairs, and tables in the way. Story 5. I once worked with a teenage boy with autism. Let's call him Ahmed. Academically, he could handle material around a 2nd or 3rd grade level. Other students at a similar level eventually went on to hold jobs. They still needed someone to help with budgeting, paying bills, and scheduling doctor's appointments, but they could manage most aspects of daily life independently. But Ahmed couldn't do anything on his own. Literally, nothing. He was barely toilet trained because he needed someone to tell him every step of what to do. Other kids in his class, similar in intellect and also on the spectrum, could dress themselves, make breakfast, and walk to school. Ahmed knew what to do, but he couldn't take the initiative without direction. If he got stuck, he'd just start yelling, "Mrs. Smith! Mrs. Smith!" until I came to tell him what came next. If I left him to put his things in his locker by himself, something I knew he could do, he might stand there for half an hour, frozen, waiting for instructions. His mom would sometimes watch through the classroom window and then call the principal to complain that we had left him in the hallway instead of putting his things away for him. Then his mom came in. She tossed her bags at the teaching assistant as if they were her personal servants, just as I imagine she thought everyone should serve her son. Then she went behind him and started kicking lightly at his feet, clapping her hands. "Come on, Ahmed! Let's go, Ahmed! Come on, come on!" Every single step, every part of every process. Like the world's most irritating mix of drill sergeant and dance instructor. Except drill sergeants and dance instructors at least expect you to learn the steps eventually. She didn't. And I can't help but wonder, what does that do to a person's brain? To never have to do anything without someone telling you every move? Obviously, it causes damage. Maybe it was cultural or class-related. Maybe where she came from, independence wasn't valued the same way. Maybe she didn't see it as a goal worth pursuing. Especially if she assumed she'd always be there to do everything for him. I still see him sometimes. He's a complete mess now, drugged out of his mind. It breaks my heart. In the end, it wasn't really anything Ahmed said that made me lose hope. It was what his mother showed us. After that day, I realized I had no idea what more I could do to help him. I just did what I was told, marched him around like a marionette, copying her approach so she wouldn't complain again. Still, my contract wasn't renewed because I didn't show her enough empathy. The irony of that has never left me. I do have empathy for her, more than she probably knows. She's raising a deeply challenging child who overwhelms her every single day. I can feel for her, recognize how hard she's trying, and still believe that what she's doing isn't helping him in the long run. Story 6. I went to college to become a teacher, but changed my career focus by my sophomore year for many of the reasons mentioned in this thread. I tutored for 2 years in high school, working mostly with 9th and 10th graders in English and math, and also helped 12th graders with their college applications and essays. In college, I tutored 6th through 8th graders for 2 years in a more urban neighborhood. The high school students were fine, but the middle schoolers I worked with were either in behavior disorder classes or years behind in basic skills like reading and writing. The administration made it clear that their main priority was for these students to pass the state tests, not to improve their actual academic performance. Essentially, the schools knew these students had limited academic potential and just wanted them to get passing scores so they could move them along to the local high school to deal with. The schools would lose funding if the class as a whole did not meet the required passing test scores. Most of the exercises we did were Scantron-based. I realized that many of these kids would probably not graduate once they reached high school because the middle school was not addressing their foundational issues. Some had reading levels equivalent to first grade. Outside of the Scantron work, most of my time was spent preventing the kids from physically fighting each other. During my first week alone, there were 2 fights. I carried a walkie-talkie and had to check in regularly with the school police officer, as incidents happened at least once a week. The saddest situation involved a student whose brother had recently died because of gang violence. Not long after, the student began wearing gang colors to school and was repeatedly told to change into gym clothes for breaking the dress code. I knew that he was heading down the same path that had cost his brother his life. Honestly, the whole experience was depressing, and I eventually changed my career path and moved into marketing. My friends who stayed in teaching either love it or absolutely hate their lives now. I know that if I had continued down that path, I would have been one of the latter. It would have been bad for me and unfair to any future students I might have taught. Teaching to the test might keep the funding coming, but it fails the students in the long run. Some schools do not even seem to care beyond meeting those minimum standards. I live in Chicago now, where over the past few years, more than 50 schools have been shut down. It is terrible for those kids, and if I had stuck with my original plan, I probably would be out of a job anyway, with fewer schools left to teach in. Kudos to those who shared and are still passionate about their jobs. Story 7. I student teach for college, and I've seen it all. Kids don't just act better or try harder because there's a student teacher in the room. One kid in a tutoring program had amazing math skills. I think his name was Caden, a 3rd grader doing long division easily. From what I've seen in local schools, long division isn't introduced until 4th grade. He was teaching himself fractions, and they were all correct. I had never seen that, even in gifted classes. The tutoring program was for at-risk kids, most of whom didn't have parents at home 90% of the time. They usually didn't get breakfast or dinner at home or any kind of praise or study time. Most were below the poverty line or being raised by a barely older sibling. This kid was the only one who tried and didn't come for the after-school sandwiches. For the first month or 2, he was excited and eager, glad that I was helping him and proud of his progress. I was incredibly impressed. He was being made fun of by the other kids for trying so hard and basically being smart. Over the next 2 months, he started doing less self-teaching and stopped turning in his homework. Even though it was all done and correct, he would just stick it in his bag and not turn it in. His grades began to drop, and the other kids made fun of him for that too. After that, he would come to tutoring, put his head down on the desk, eat the sandwich, do a few questions, and leave. He eventually stopped coming altogether. By the next semester, I heard he had started breaking rules and getting in trouble. This poor kid was doing so well, even excelling, and yet his fear of standing out turned him into a completely different person. I don't know what happened to him after I moved to another school. This was 3 years. Ego. So I can only hope he got help and was able to get back on track. Poor Caden. Story 8. I work with autistic elementary students, most of whom are nonverbal or lower functioning. On one hand, you could say they aren't going to change much because of the nature of their disorder. But you'd be surprised by how much personality shines through and how deeply their environment and family dynamics can influence their behavior. There's one student I work with closely, and I adore the little guy. He's probably our most verbal student, with a high, squeaky voice that makes everything he says sound both earnest and funny. He's always quoting lines from television shows or repeating phrases he hears in his head, and sometimes it's just the cutest thing. That said, for a long time, he was a handful. When it came time to work, we couldn't get him to sit and complete even one problem without him trying to bolt around the room like a whirlwind. If we pushed him to stay on task or sent him for a timeout, what we call a break, he'd get frustrated and start screaming or crying, which disrupted the whole class. So, we implemented a simple structure: 2 minutes of work, 2 minutes of play. If he refused to work, yelled, or screamed, he'd take a 2-minute break in the corner. As you can imagine, it didn't go well at first. I spent 2 or 3 weeks battling him over this concept. There were plenty of days when he did no work at all, just screamed in the corner until he was red in the face. But after a while, something clicked. He started to get it. And now, most days, he's our star student. I say most days, though, because what I've learned ties into something a lot of people misunderstand about parenting and kids like him. One day, during that initial stretch, he was in the corner, sobbing, full meltdown, tears everywhere, nose running, completely inconsolable. In the middle of it all, he looked up and said, "I need a tissue." I handed him one and he leaned forward, expecting me to wipe his nose for him. I said gently, "No, you can do this yourself." He shrieked even louder and cried harder. It was immediately clear this was something he was used to at home. He was accustomed to getting everything he wanted, hand over foot, to the point that his mom was literally wiping his nose for him. 2. After any break from school, weekends, winter vacation, you name it, we would see a lot of those old behaviors return. It was like hitting a reset button. We'd have to spend extra time in break again just to work the habits back out. Clearly, things at home were run very differently than at school. 3. A lot of what he says in his constant stream of quotes and phrases comes straight from home. It reminds me of an abused parrot repeating what it hears. Thankfully, there isn't much swearing, but when he's frustrated, he'll start shouting things like, "Shut the door," the kind of short, angry phrases. You can imagine frustrated adults yelling. It's disheartening sometimes. I love the children I work with, but when I see and hear things like that, I just wish there were more I could do for them beyond the classroom. I'm sure this boy has a bright future for his level. He might even become independent enough to live on his own someday. Still, I can't help but wish I could do more. Story 9. I'm a second-grade teacher. I have a boy who lies constantly about anything. He was on camera watching the footage of himself punching a student in the face, and he crossed his arms and said, "If I didn't do it, then I didn't do it." The worst part is mom believes every word he says and attacks the school for making him accountable for his actions. He's going to do something as an adult and go to jail. When they pull him away, I know he's going to be yelling, "If I didn't do it, I didn't do it." Story 10. On Friday, a girl told me that she and her mother were walking down the street behind an old man. The old man reached into his pocket and all his money fell onto the sidewalk. She and her mother ran to pick it up. When the old man tried to take it back, they told him it was their money and to go F themselves. Story 11. I had one student at a bilingual school in Mexico who, after being there and supposedly learning English for more than 5 years, still couldn't speak it and barely made any effort to learn. She didn't do assignments and failed almost every test. When we mentioned it to her parents, their attitude was that she didn't really need English because she would just marry someone who would take care of everything for her. My thought was, who would want to marry someone who knows nothing and makes no effort? Story 12. I work at an alternative school for kids who were kicked out of public school for severe emotional and behavioral issues. Many of them will require government services for the rest of their lives. It's rarely just one thing they say, but you can tell they may never have what most would consider a normal life. It's a little disheartening to hear a 6-year-old scream that he's going to hurt you, especially when you were playing tag just 5 minutes earlier. There's a young boy who can be very sweet, an adorable butterball. However, he has severe behavioral issues and gets restrained at some point almost every day. I saw his parents one day as they walked him to school from their government-subsidized housing nearby. It was 50 degrees out, and the little boy was wearing a basketball jersey and shorts. His parents looked exactly how I expected and were rude to all the staff they interacted with. It really showed me that no matter how much we do, he spends most of his life with his terrible parents. Edit. Having a child with behavioral issues doesn't inherently make someone a bad parent. However, in our program specifically, most of the students come from harsh backgrounds which either cause or worsen their behavior. Story 13. I had a student who was always acting up. I constantly tried talking to him about his behavior and wrote plenty of referrals. Throughout all of this, I would email and call his mother but never got a response. One day, he was pacing around and texting someone. I told him to put his phone away and he said, "I can't. I'm not too happy right now." So I said, "Will you take it out to the hall and I'll give you 1 minute?" His response really shook me. He said, "No, I'll sit down. I just want my mom to turn the water back on." When all you know about a student is what you see in the classroom, it's easy to forget they may not have a good home life. I did wonder, is there hope for him? But it wasn't truly his fault. He just had a terrible home life, stricken by poverty. Story 14. I had one 4-year-old who couldn't hold a pencil. He couldn't remember how to pick it up and didn't have the strength to press it onto the paper to get any leverage. He couldn't color and had almost no motor skills. He didn't have a dominant hand. His parents often left him at my learning center for an hour, even though he couldn't use the bathroom on his own. At 4 years old, he didn't have the slightest grasp of the alphabet and couldn't retain anything we taught him. It took a month just to get him to count to 10. My theory is that on top of a learning disability or developmental delay his mother was in denial about, he was a natural lefty who was forced to use his right hand. Because of the disability, he couldn't, and he ended up not developing motor skills in either hand. Poor kid. Story 15. I taught lower elementary. Most teachers get frustrated at some point when trying to help a child who may be struggling cognitively. This was the case with one of my favorite students. It didn't matter that he couldn't do the same work as his peers due to his significant cognitive challenges. He was performing at his ability level, but he was just so kind to everyone. I set aside time every day to help him with his reading. We were using the short story of the Ugly Duckling, which had one short sentence per page. After 2 weeks, he could get through it with minimal help. However, reading the words isn't all there is to reading. I asked him if he could tell me what the story was about since we had spent time on it every day for the last 2 weeks. He started his oral retelling really well, and I was super excited. This was a huge deal for him because, up until this point, I couldn't get any retelling or comprehension out of him. I was thrilled. He fed off my energy, and he was so proud of himself. This kid was glowing. We were only 3/4 of the way through the story when we got to the end of the Ugly Duckling. He was telling me that the duckling changes, a word that takes him forever to say, let alone read. Then he stopped and went into a deep thinking stage. I prodded him a little. He changes? What does he change into, bud? He brought his eyes back from the ceiling, and with the biggest smile, he shouted, a butterfly. Story 16. Not a teacher, but my wife had a student in 3rd grade who refused to do any writing assignments. She told him that she would call his parents to explain what was going on if he didn't start doing his work. He said, I don't care. My mom said I don't have to do anything I don't want to do. Rules don't apply to me. When my wife called his mom, she was told that she, my wife, just had to understand how her son is, and if he didn't want to do the work, then he didn't have to. After that, his behavior made sense, and it was a very tough year. He stopped doing all his work and started harassing other kids, probably partially out of boredom since he was doing nothing else by the end of the year. As long as he was happy, my wife couldn't get his mom on board. Story 17. There was this kid named Lawrence, one of those typical wallflower Catholic kids I grew up with. His dad was a leader in our scout troop and was extremely meticulous. Everything had to be perfect. In the late 70s, most of the troop leaders had a relaxed dress code, but Lawrence's dad dressed like a model out of a 1940s scouting manual, complete with a brown uniform and wide-brimmed hat. Everything was pleated and pressed. He drove an old MG Roadster that was constantly breaking down. They were upper class, and Lawrence's mom was not in the picture, but the way his dad picked on him was brutal. Stand up straight, Lawrence. Chin up. Be a good lad. Chest out. Chin up. Lawrence, don't go over there. It's dirty over there. Lawrence, stand straight and tall when I address you. Don't be rude. Wait until I have started eating before you start. Lawrence, do I have to raise my voice, Lawrence? By high school, Lawrence had just given up. He wasn't perfect enough, so why bother? He stared into space, attending school in person but like a blank, hollow shell. His clothing didn't change. It only became dirtier. His hair grew long, he lost weight, and his clothes hung loosely on him. I think the only way he could cope with his dad's control was through passive resistance. By his senior year, he had flunked out. I'm not sure what happened to him after that. Story 18. I had a student who was a hoarder. He was one of those kids everyone remembers, the one with a backpack stuffed with supplies for every class, like he was carrying a small grocery cart on his back. One day, I was walking him to his locker to look for an assignment I knew I had given him before, and I noticed a nasty smell. Big surprise, it was coming from his locker. When I opened it, I found 89 cartons of chocolate milk stacked inside. That wasn't all. On the floor, he had a large mason jar filled with what looked like dead bugs. I asked him why he had so much milk in his locker, and he replied, stone-faced, to dip the bugs in. I'm never sure what happened to him after he left, but that was the most disturbing thing I encountered. Story 19. The students where I teach are challenging. It's a rural community of about 2,500 people. Many have troubles at home, and about 95% of the students simply don't care. One girl was on her 4th attempt at Science 10 and was again getting 0 because she does nothing and rarely shows up. She was in my class again this year, but decided to do Adult Basic instead, since she'll be 18 soon. She failed that too. Another girl gets high every lunch and comes to class blitzed out of her skull, just staring blankly at her paper. I called her parents, only to find out they were the ones smoking with her during lunch. What do you know? One teacher is severely allergic to perfume. One kid brought some to school and sprayed it in her face. She ended up in the hospital for almost a week, barely able to breathe through her trachea. The same kid called her a bitch on her first day back. Ah, Monday will be fun. Story 20. Not a teacher, but I know a guy who dropped out of school at around the age of 12, supposedly because he was bullied, though I don't buy that as the real reason. He then spent the next 8 years chain smoking in his nan's front room, playing computer games and smoking weed and drinking. By the age of 16, he became eligible for some government benefits, but he was still too lazy to go down to the job center or get someone to help him fill out the forms, even if he claimed to have dyslexia. He could read and write fine, did basic math with no problem, and was very street smart. Even free money couldn't tempt him to leave the house. Eventually, I helped him get a manual labor job, but he lasted only 2 weeks, going home early because it was too hard, and then got fired. A few months later, he got a job at a local off-license owned by a friend's parents. He was fired again because he was asked to dispose of some cardboard boxes by tearing them up and putting them in the recycling. At the end of the day, the boss came back to find that he had literally sat there and torn only half a box into tiny squares by hand. He was fired on the spot. A couple more years passed, and this time another friend got him a job in a care home doing night shifts. It suited him fine, as all he had to do were minor tasks for the residents. As far as I know, he's still employed there. I suppose the moral of the story is that even if you think there's no hope for some people, all they really need is the right environment to do what's required. And that's it. He's an all right guy, a decent friend, but I can't help feeling like he has so much wasted potential. I'm still wondering if he'll stick with that job or quit, but I sincerely hope the better side of humanity prevails and he keeps working at something. Story 21. I had a student my very first year of teaching who was old enough to drive themselves to middle school. This student skipped class as much as legally possible without either them or their parent getting into serious legal trouble. When they were in class, they did anything but what they were supposed to. If told to stand, they'd sit. Asked to read something aloud, they'd stay silent. Asked to be quiet, they'd start telling stories to the people next to them as loudly as possible. The kid was one of 6 brothers and sisters in a family where their mom was only present physically. There was a time I had to fill out a report because I hadn't seen the kid for a week and a half with zero information as to why. My school is pretty disorganized, so when I went to ask, the people in charge reacted like, "Wait, you haven't seen them in how long? Bish, it's literally your job to notice and report this stuff, not mine." So they made calls and did their thing, and I checked back later to see what they found. They had called the mom and she said she didn't notice the kid was gone. It turned out the student had left with one of their older brothers to live with members of his gang. The kid came back acting exactly the same as before, failing every class, ending up in a corrective program like every year, and then getting pushed forward a grade as usual. This family was basically raised to hate authority and any system that wasn't tied to the streets. I did all the reporting I could to get something done through CPS, but from what I could find, the parent knew all the right ways to avoid raising red flags when inspectors stopped by. It still blows my mind in so many ways thinking about it, that this kid was so smart and used that natural gift to game the system perfectly, ultimately ruining their own future. That the family was never removed from that horrid parent. That the parent raised her children for a life of drugs, trafficking, and prison. I overheard one of the brothers say once that he couldn't wait for a cop to try and arrest him so he could go to jail just like his cousin. Kids like that make teaching hard in so many ways, not just in the classroom where they take time away from other students. Most of us join this profession because a teacher, or multiple teachers, had an incredible influence on our lives, and we want to be that for someone else. But you get there and learn the hard way that there are kids you can give everything to, your time, your money, your social energy, your sanity, and they either never see it, or worse, see you as an antagonistic prick for trying to get involved with them. That kid absolutely hated me, but I was their only teacher actually trying to give them a way out. I was the only one meeting with counselors about it, meeting with attendance clerks, calling home multiple times a week, only to get a full voicemail inbox or a nearly incoherent hello followed by a hang-up. I lived in a different cycle of poverty than this kid did, but I still wanted to do everything I could to help them the way my teachers had helped me. But it changes you when you have someone about to fall off a cliff and you drop everything to try to catch them and pull them up, and they use the hand they're hanging onto to flip you off as they fall. Story 22. The first week of school, during my first year teaching ninth grade, was unforgettable. I was also mildly concussed that week, thanks to a pickup truck that ran a stop sign the week before. The truck T-boned my compact car on the driver's side as I was driving. Both vehicles were totaled, and I got my bell rung spectacularly, just in time for my first week as a teacher in a high-needs school. He came into my class high on something. He threw a chair/desk combo across the room at a rival classmate. While I was on the phone with security, he came up to me and got right in my face. He was an inch taller than I was and skinnier, nothing but muscle. He told me, "You're not calling anyone," then took the phone from my shock-frozen hand, hung it up, and went after another classmate. I will never forget his eyes as he spoke to me. Wild, empty eyes like no one was home inside. Security was at my door to haul him away mere moments later. The police asked if I wanted to press charges, but my principal warned me not to. He was a kid from a broken home and deserved a second chance, she said. So, I didn't. My principal kept me separated from his guardian throughout the ordeal. She said his mom, the woman who'd shown up when the police were called, wasn't really his mother. She was an awful woman who didn't love the boy, my principal said. They went to the same church. It was a small, rural Title I school. All the boy needed, she told me, was a good role model, someone to show him compassion for a change. She told me never to bother calling his home, that she, the principal, would handle it. He was suspended for 5 days. Things didn't improve. I tried reaching his home several times to arrange a call or a parent-teacher conference, but I never got a reply. Things only got worse. He was in and out of school all semester, a day here, 5 days there, because of drugs, fights, skipping class, and more. He had problems in every class, every elective, every lunch period. Eventually, he had to wear an ankle bracelet for probation monitoring, though I never learned what triggered that one. Eventually, I decided to stop listening to my principal. After countless attempts at all hours of the day to every number on his record, I finally reached his aunt, who was his legal guardian. She told me about their home. Both of his parents were in jail on drug charges and had been there for years. They were likely to remain there for a long time. He lived with his aunt because she was the only family member willing and able to take him in. He had been a crack baby. She seemed kind and caring, but was in far over her head. A single mother working 2 or 3 jobs, she already had several children of her own, all younger than he was. Life was exhausting and unstable. His gang and drug activity had taken a heavy toll on her and her kids. She was afraid of him, of his friends, of what might happen next. He had been violent with them and had brought dangerous people into their home. She had already given up. She wanted him out, wanted the county to take him away. Social services, juvenile detention, anything that would remove him from the house so she could protect and care for her own children. According to her, the authorities wouldn't do anything. Her only hope was that he would cause enough trouble at school for a teacher to press charges, which might finally push juvenile hall to take him. He'd been suspended many times, but every time a teacher had the chance to press charges, they declined. She sounded so lost. She asked me why I hadn't pressed charges, her voice breaking, almost in tears. Why hadn't I spoken to her that first week? Why hadn't I just done it? So, I told her. I said the principal had told me not to, and that I was calling her against the principal's orders. I apologized for not pressing charges. I told her I was brand new and afraid to start my career by sending a student to court after being advised not to. That was when I knew he was a hopeless case. I told my fellow teachers, the ones who also had him in class, what I had learned. Everyone agreed. It was a lose-lose situation, and there was no saving him. By Thanksgiving, he was permanently expelled for the rest of the year. The final straw was a knife fight in the school cafeteria. Gang-related, drug-related. I hope he went to juvenile detention, but I never found out for sure. I expect that by now he's in jail, just like his parents, but I stopped checking the papers for his name. When he was underage, they wouldn't have printed it anyway. I hope his aunt and little cousins are doing well now. In the end, it wasn't what he said that stayed with me. It was what his aunt said. It was clear he was beyond help. There was nothing that I or anyone else could have done to fix him or save him. Story 23. I've often felt that some of my teachers viewed me differently since kindergarten. In elementary school, I was frequently yelled at and treated harshly by teachers, which was very difficult for me. I wasn't a bad student, but I had undiagnosed autism, later diagnosed in high school, as well as anxiety and depression, diagnosed in middle school. I was also extremely sensitive to sensory input. At one point, I was nearly misdiagnosed with ADHD and almost placed on the wrong medication. Sudden transitions between subjects without warning were especially hard for me, and I often became frustrated as a result. For most grades, I didn't have any friends in class. A big part of that came from how I was treated by teachers, who sometimes even told other kids to stay away from me. I also struggled with migraines, but no one believed me, and I wasn't allowed to go to the nurse's office because I was accused of making it up. I cried often because I was bullied daily by both students and at times teachers. And instead of being helped, I was punished for crying and mocked for being a crybaby. It wasn't something I could control. I just wanted to be left alone, or at the very least treated kindly by the people who were supposed to help. Over time, I developed a reputation as a bad kid, especially in certain grades where teachers would make false claims about my behavior. Their word carried more weight than mine, and I'd often be punished at home because of it. One memory that stands out is from first grade. My pencil kept breaking during a test, so I had to get up several times to sharpen it. The teacher yelled at me for getting up, and when the pencil broke again, I pressed too hard and accidentally snapped part of it off. The broken piece flew across the room, and the teacher accused me of throwing it on purpose. I was treated as if I'd done something terrible and was sent to detention and punished again at home. I spent a lot of time in detention or being sent out of class that year. Outside of school environments, I rarely had any behavioral issues. I got along well with other kids at parks, arcades, and other public places, which was part of why it took so long for anyone to realize I was on the autism spectrum. Looking back, I believe many of the problems I faced could have been avoided if the teachers had shown more patience, kindness, and understanding, instead of resorting to yelling. I did have one amazing teacher in third grade, a wonderful woman who was strict but fair. She never yelled and actually took time to talk with me. She treated everyone with respect, and that year was the only one that wasn't miserable. I didn't cry constantly, and I was rarely bullied. Unfortunately, the years outside of that one were much harder and left lasting emotional scars. By sixth grade, I felt emotionally drained and disconnected. My behavior improved as I got older, but my mental health declined, and teachers who saw me every day either didn't notice or didn't seem to care. By the time I reached middle school, the emotional toll from everything I'd experienced both inside and outside of school had become overwhelming. I felt completely disconnected from myself and from others. I forgot how to smile and had to relearn how later in life. I stopped speaking in school and often spent my days in a state of emotional numbness, just trying to get through the day. I did eventually begin therapy, which helped me start to process what had happened. By high school, I was no longer seen as a problem student, but I was still extremely anxious and quiet. The environment there was harsh. Security guards were often shouting, and students were treated more like prisoners than learners. But after everything I had gone through in elementary school, I had become almost immune to it. Despite my struggles, I never received support from special education services because my grades were considered too good, so I wasn't allowed to take breaks in the resource room for quiet or calm. College, however, was a completely different story. The environment was open, respectful, and free. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy and accepted. Therapy, along with the supportive atmosphere in college, helped me heal in ways I hadn't thought possible. I still face health challenges, including multiple sclerosis, which changed many of my plans, but I've learned to focus on what I can do rather than what I've lost. Story 24. This was a small public school in upstate New York, with a pretty laid-back atmosphere. The principal was in his early 30s, and everyone generally got along. One time, a friend of mine got a referral, and somehow managed to talk his way out of it by offering 2 pizzas. Fluorescent lights and computer labs always gave me migraines, so I often ended up in the nurse's office just to rest. One day, I opened her fridge to grab some water and noticed 2 pizza boxes inside. She told me they belonged to the principal and had been there for a week. The principal and I usually got along. I was one of the smart kids, but I also got in trouble now and then, so I asked him about the pizzas, and he told me I could have them. There were 2 large pies with only a couple of slices missing. My best friend and I brought them to study hall, shared them with everyone who wanted a slice, and turned it into a mini pizza party. It was definitely a weird little school. We had this classmate who was honestly one of the most unforgettable people I've ever met, a wild mix of small-town raver and volunteer firefighter. She was only 15 and would literally leave class to go help put out real fires and save lives. On her days off, she was just as laid back as the rest of us and smoked. Then, there was this other student, an older-looking Irish guy who always had this classic too cool for school attitude, complete with a cigarette tucked behind his ear. Believe it or not, he's now a dad with someone from our class. Despite how strange or chaotic things could seem, we were actually one of the highest scoring schools in the state. We had tons of AP classes, and even students who didn't think of themselves as academic ended up doing really well. I don't know exactly what the secret formula was, but somehow that school managed to get incredible results out of everyone. It was surreal, but I loved it. There was a drag performer who was one of the most popular kids in school. Most students were pretty relaxed and open-minded. Weed was common. The jocks were genuinely kind. And our strongest sports team was women's basketball. The gym teachers were cool and laid back. And honestly, nothing about this school sounds real. They even encouraged and funded the senior prank every year, which completely transformed the campus. We had 3 goths, me, my ex, and one other who was really cute. But we never ended up being friends. Most teachers even let you listen to music during tests. One history teacher let me sleep in class because it was first period. I was doing so well that she figured I needed the rest more than I needed to be awake. I was confident enough to tempt fate and listen to Sabaton during the World War II unit. I didn't get caught. In 10th grade, the library had a copy of Lolita, which they removed only after I did a book report and presentation and returned it. They honestly had just forgotten it was there. The administration generally didn't interfere much, probably because the school was doing well academically. Oh, there was also this student who had a bad habit with drugs and kept hitting on my girlfriend. I still wish I'd stood up to him. Story 25. I was a troubled kid. I got suspended a lot growing up and was eventually expelled in 4th grade after an inappropriate incident involving a teacher. The school called emergency services, and, fun fact, firefighters are usually the first to respond in emergencies. They restrained me for safety and took me to the hospital for an evaluation. This meant I was transferred from a Catholic school to a public one. In grade 5, I didn't have any suspensions, but by grade 6, the same challenges resurfaced and I started getting suspended again. When I moved on to middle school, my parents were dreading it, as they always did whenever I faced a transition. I lasted only about 2 months before being placed in a specialized program that functioned much like an alternative school. The classes were small, with several teachers in the room, and the students had a wide range of disabilities and needs. The program ran through grade 8 with the goal of eventually transitioning students back into regular schools. It was there that I met my best friend, and another friend I still keep in touch with today. The differences among the students were clear to some of us. Some children needed far more support, and some had much more challenging behaviors than others. Eventually, my parents arranged for me to stay at a house where I was supervised and taught how to behave. I don't know how else to describe it other than being parented by a professional, if that makes sense. That experience became a major turning point for me. I realized I wasn't like most other people. I had a distinct way of thinking and processing the world. For the first time, I had the space to grow within that difference, rather than being punished or confined by it. It gave me a chance to build a new mindset, a new mantra to live by. After that, change came, but slowly. When I left the program, I transitioned into high school. Nothing particularly dramatic happened during those years, at least nothing worth mentioning in a short story, but things began to stabilize. Over time, I managed to graduate with a solid average and went on to attend a respected university for my post-secondary studies. My life has had its share of ups and downs. Maybe I took the road less traveled, but I still reached the same destination as an above-average student. So, I just want to say this. Some of us may have had rough childhoods, but that doesn't mean we're doomed by them. With time, effort, and the right support, those hard years can shape us into stronger, more resilient people. Story 26. Late to the party, and nothing too unusual for this thread, but this really stuck with me. I was teaching math to disaffected high school students, and to start the year, I would ask 2 questions. Who has to do more math work? Students who hate it or students who love it? The answer is always students who love it. Of course, this is wrong. Students who love it take the required classes early and don't need to take any more in the first couple of years of high school. Have to is a bit misleading here. Meanwhile, students who hate it fail and repeat the same boring work over and over. So, I would tell them, if you want to get done with the math, get motivated, come see me after class, get this stuff into your brain, and move on to the things you really want to do with your life. Some students found this silly. Some found it truly inspiring. The second question was, what do you want for a career? Will you need any math? One student said, I want to work at my dad's garage. I won't need math. I replied, "Sure you will. You need to read gauges and know whether 450 psi is a bit much for the tires on a Ford Focus, whether 15 miles per gallon is reasonable for a new Camry, or if it's a sign something's wrong. Do well in this class and your dad will give you more responsibilities faster." Next student, same question. "I want to do makeup professionally. I don't need math." "Sure you will. How will you know if a client cheats you or only pays for half your time? How will you know whether buying a case of eyeliner for $50 and then selling the individual tubes for $5 is making you a profit unless you know there are at least 10 tubes per case? It's a fun game. I enjoy envisioning real uses for math, and the kids appreciate the individual attention and not having to do real work on the first day." Next student, same question. "I'm going to jail next year. My dad's in jail. My grandfather died in jail. My uncle's in jail. That's where I'm going." Well, come on. You'll still need to count cigarettes or something. And maybe you can find a job here that doesn't land you in jail. That might be easier than doing time. No, it doesn't matter. All I need to know is how to fight. I won't ever need math. His unshakable certainty that his life was already mapped out really shook me. I don't think I made a damn bit of difference to that kid, and I'm pretty sure he's in jail now. Story 27. This one's with a twist. I taught at a technical college and had students coming in for retraining, along with support from various social services to help them learn new vocational skills. Computers are important. Learn computers. One young lady entered the class. She was clever, charismatic, and completely uninterested in attending or doing any work. I gave her my usual line. "Look, I'm not your parent or your boss. I'm here to teach you whatever you want to learn. If you don't want to be here, that's totally fine, but I cannot have you disrupting or taking away from those who do want to learn. If you want me to mark you as attending when you'd rather blow it off, let's make a deal. At least poke your head in the class so I know you're alive, and I'll mark you present. You have total freedom to decide how this works. Deal? But I have to tell you, the stuff I'm teaching you will almost guarantee a really good job when you're done. So consider that." She replied, "I'm female, disabled, I have a prosthetic leg, and I'm half native. I'll never have to work a day in my life. The government will pay for anything." I said, "Okay, that's fine too. Your choice." And I really meant it. I figured she wasn't destined for much in life and wrote her off. She took me up on my offer to blow things off for a while, but gradually started attending more regularly. She had behavioral problems, but I held a steady course, never judged her as she sorted herself out, and set clear boundaries for what I would and would not tolerate, as well as what was expected of her. By the end of the course, 4.5 months, she was the strongest student in the class. If she had started out that way, she would have earned top marks. As it was, she barely passed. I encouraged her to take the more advanced courses and made sure the administration knew just how strong she was. She went on to become one of the best students the school had ever seen, and certainly the sassiest. Oh boy, the mouth on her. Her favorite phrase was, "I'm going to kick you so hard, you'll be splinters for a week." I have never before or since seen someone take control of their life so completely or so successfully. I have no idea where she is now or what she's doing, but I'm sure that whatever challenge she's facing, she's kicking it in the buns. Story 28. Well, you probably won't believe this, but it's not entirely true. Here's the problem. The majority of students who take basic algebra and trigonometry, courses I've taught several times, don't care because they're too uneducated to see the usefulness of what they're learning. But the story goes much deeper than just mathematics. They don't understand that I'm not only teaching math, I'm also teaching a very practical skill, analytical thinking. Here's where I stand on the issue. Basic algebra and trigonometry shouldn't be mandatory at the college level, though you could make a strong case for trig being necessary. The problem is that people entering college are often weak in basic algebra and trig. My stance is that you should only have to take math at the college level if your degree requires it, and it should be taught in a meaningful context. While I spent most of my life thinking that most people should at least be average at basic math, the reality is that most will never even be subpar at simple tasks, like solving an equation. I've long abandoned the notion that math is important for everyone. You say all that time wasted could be spent on useful stuff. I highly doubt that someone who struggles with basic algebra would have even the slightest success in fields like geology, astronomy, or especially chemistry. To be perfectly honest, that statement tells me you don't really understand those fields. And to address your last paragraph, that is purely ignorant. Go ahead and try to go back in time, though you wouldn't even understand how without very advanced mathematical ideas, and stop that from happening. If you halt the advancement of mathematics, you halt the advancement of society. We wouldn't learn basic physics, how to build computers, how to fly, how to make cell phones, how to build cars, how to construct high-rise buildings, and so on. As a teacher, I fully understand your distaste for things you probably find very hard, though I strongly suspect your exposure to them is lacking. But you should at least understand that these things are absolutely necessary for life as we know it. Otherwise, you'd probably just be some sack of air, slamming a stick into a rock over and over for fun instead of browsing Reddit. And for the record, you don't screw math. It screws you, baby. Story 29. I'm a tutor for athletes at a university. Most of them are all right, good enough students, but they have so many scaffolds, tutors, mentors, and a team of adults creating their entire schedules, down to when they eat, study, and sleep, that sometimes they act as if they're not responsible for any of it. They don't know when their own exams are. They usually ask me. I'm a tutor, not a scheduler. They always walk into the tutoring session asking, "What are we doing today?" And that's not how it works. They need to tell me what they need help with. Otherwise, I have no idea what chapter they're in or what they're doing in class. I'm not allowed to be in contact with their professors or TAs. That's their responsibility. A lot of them are clearly only there to play football. Some have even told me as much. They just want to pass their classes. They're not thinking about careers outside the NFL. The worst part is that most of this is the fault of the school. The school gives them so many scaffolds to keep their star athletes, who would otherwise fail out in their first semester. The university wants them to focus on football instead of classes because they bring in money. They have study halls where athletes are handed a sheet detailing the assignments they need to finish that day and sit next to mentors who make sure the work actually gets done. No wonder they ask me what to do. As a student who is not an athlete, it actually makes me angry to think about how easy college would have been with all those scaffolds. But the university is basically setting them up for failure. If they don't go on to play in the NFL, who is going to hire them? Edit. I should mention this is not all athletes and not even all football players, though they tend to be the biggest culprits. I usually run into this problem when the athlete didn't request a tutor themselves, me, but a mentor or supervisor did after a bad grade. Sometimes they don't even know they're getting a tutor until I show up. The whole system is terribly mismanaged. In particular, if a student needs a tutor but doesn't want one, it highlights this larger issue. By contrast, students who request a tutor themselves are usually much more competent and self-directed. Story 30. I had a student who was always acting up. I constantly tried talking to him about his behavior, and I wrote plenty of referrals. Throughout all of this, I would email and call his mother, but I never got a response. At first, I thought maybe he was just being difficult or seeking attention, but over time, I realized there was a lot more going on beneath the surface. One day, he was pacing around and texting someone. I told him to put his phone away, and he said, "I can't. I'm not too happy right now." So I said, "Will you take it out to the hall and I'll give you 1 minute?" His response really shook me. He said, "No, I'll sit down. I just want my mom to turn the water back on." That moment made me pause and reflect on how easy it is for educators to misjudge students when we only see them in the classroom. It was a clear reminder that behavior issues are not always about defiance or laziness. This student was living in a home struck by poverty, where basic necessities like water were not guaranteed. It was not a matter of choice, it was a matter of survival. Suddenly, all of his acting out made sense, not as a problem to punish, but as a symptom of the larger struggles he was facing at home. His frustration, distraction, and inability to focus were the natural consequences of a life filled with instability. After this incident, I started paying closer attention to the signs that students might be struggling outside of school. I noticed how often children would come to class tired, hungry, or distracted. Some would forget assignments or fail to complete work, not because they were lazy, but because their energy and focus were consumed by worries no one in the classroom could see. I realized that my role as a teacher was not just to enforce rules, but to support students in navigating the challenges that life had thrown at them. I began to look for ways to provide small victories, offering extra time on assignments, checking in quietly, or just listening when they needed someone to talk to. This experience also made me consider the broader systemic issues at play. Students living in poverty often face barriers that go far beyond what happens in a classroom. Lack of access to basic utilities, food insecurity, Unstable housing and limited parental support can create a cycle of academic struggle. It is unfair to hold students solely accountable for their academic performance without understanding these challenges. As educators, we can make a difference, but we must also advocate for policies and resources that support these children. In the case of my student, even though I could not fix his home life, I could offer consistency and patience. I could make the classroom a place where he felt safe, where he could learn, and where he could see that someone cared. Over time, his behavior improved slightly, not because he suddenly changed, but because he felt seen and supported. This reinforced for me that empathy and understanding are just as crucial in education as curriculum and instruction. Story 31. I teach computer science at a university. I get a lot of freshmen who chose the major because they heard it was high-paying, but they don't actually like the subject. Some struggle silently, while others show it in subtle ways. Every so often, a student says something that makes me stop and think, wow, there is no hope left for you. The worst example was a recent student who asked if they could just do the assignments by hand. I was taken aback and asked, "Do you mean you don't want to use a computer at all?" They nodded and said, "People use computers too much. I don't start doing that." I paused, trying to process what I had just heard. This was a programming course for computers in a major about making computers do things. You are literally going to need a computer for everything. They went on to explain that they thought computers could do too much and that they wanted people to stop relying on them so heavily. I couldn't help but think this was the exact opposite of what the course was for. I tried to reason with them, saying, if you don't use a computer, you can't actually complete the work. You will miss the point of the exercises entirely. They shook their head and insisted, "No, I'll just do it on paper. I don't like sitting in front of a screen." At that moment, I knew this was one of those situations where no amount of explanation or encouragement would change their mind. Their mindset was completely at odds with the major. It wasn't a lack of skill, but a refusal to engage with the tools required. I calmly said, "Okay, then this probably isn't the right major for you." What struck me most was not just the refusal to use a computer. It was the certainty in their statement. They truly believed they could succeed in a computer science course without using computers, without engaging with the technology that defines the field. That level of misunderstanding and resistance made it clear that their chances of success were practically non-existent. Moments like these remind me how important passion and interest are in learning. A student can have all the intelligence in the world, but if they refuse to embrace the tools and concepts that define their chosen field, there is very little a teacher can do. I left that conversation feeling both frustrated and a little sad, because this student could have had a future in computer science, but only if they were willing to meet the field halfway. Story 32. It bums me out how many answers on this thread involve students not knowing something that seems obvious, like which way north is or what a port is. Everyone has blind spots in their knowledge. I'm a 31-year-old woman with multiple degrees who lived in farm country for 5 years, and I only recently learned that a pony isn't a baby horse. We all have those oh duh moments. It's upsetting to me that teachers would go online and turn their students into jokes over these small moments. For what? Internet points? It just perpetuates the us versus them feeling that makes school feel hostile and unappealing to so many students in the first place. The college students I teach have all sorts of blind spots and struggle with things that seem simple to me. I frequently have freshmen who don't know to capitalize the word I, don't know the meanings of common words, or need repeated explanations, sometimes for 10 full weeks, about when and why to start a new paragraph in an essay. And when they ask these questions, I answer them, because that's my job, and my students and I are on the same team, Team Student. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.